if we limit ourselves to the Western labels, like who is a leftist, who's a rightist, who's a liberal, who's a conservative, who's a secular, who's religious, we're not getting the full story of what's going on, because you have many Jews in all these tribes. Often when we look at the Jewish world or we look at Israeli society, we fall into the trap of trying to analyze based on labels and frameworks that don't actually fit us, that aren't actually expressive on a deep level of who we are. And they could work to a point, but then we often run into trouble. So, these words obviously include left-wing and right-wing, religious and secular, liberal, conservative. If we're having a conversation about different Israeli political forces or figures being secular or religious, we're already having the conversation on the ideological turf of another civilization. Like, we're already ceding certain ground that takes the conversation away from the way our ancestors would have that conversation, or the way our civilization, when it was strongest and healthiest, would have understood these issues. Right?
We're using foreign language and foreign ideas.
Foreign language, foreign ideas, right? The idea of calling someone secular, it almost means that a human in its naked form is functioning within the ideological paradigm of liberalism. Right? That's what it means. And then some people have a layer of social conditioning, brainwashing, education, whatever you want to call it, on top of that, called religion. But the secular man is the naked man. Right? That's the naked man, and then there's ideology placed on top of him in certain situations. Now, the truth is, liberalism is also an ideology, right? And it's also socially conditioned, brainwashed, educated, however, we want to say this. And I think that when we step away from the having a conversation within the paradigm of Western civilization, we discover a lot more about ourselves and about the different forces within our society. So those labels, left, right, religious, secular, liberal, conservative, they hold very deep meaning for the West because they're very connected to the development of the West. They're very much rooted in Greco-Roman thought, a Christian dogma, the revolutionary transition between feudalism and capitalism. These words mean something very deep and very telling when talking about Western societies. But in Israeli society, they only really work when we're talking about the more westernized sectors of our society that reflect the divisions of the West. So that really brings us to our first major tribe, which is Yosef. Yosef and Yehuda are the two leadership tribes, and they're really the two major tribes that I think the other tribes are kind of orbiting or functioning around. Yosef is very good at managing the material world, building economies, building armies, building states. They're very focused on the material well-being of the Jewish people, our security needs, our economic needs, what will make our society successful. Also our unity. I think on a deeper level, we have to acknowledge that Yosef's main spiritual contribution is this focus on Jewish unity. Today, by the way, I think that very much expresses itself in the, bring them home movement, like the movement to bring home the hostages. I think that's very much a deep expression of Yosef's truest values. Right? Remember, Yosef is looking for his brothers. And when the first World Zionist Congress ended in Basel, Herzl very famously concluded the Congress by saying, brothers have found each other again. And basically, Mashiach ben Yosef, this concept of Mashiach ben Yosef, is what we understand to be when the forces of Yosef, the attributes, the strengths, the talents, the kochot of Yosef are directed towards Jewish liberation. And ultimately that's the physical, material rebuilding of the nation of Israel in its land without necessarily having a clear conception of what it's coming home for, because Yosef in general is very much focused on what we share in common with the other nations of the world, specifically the dominant civilizations of any given period. It can easily happen that Yosef ends up having what appears to be an inferiority complex to the values or the ideologies of other civilizations. So in the time of Yosef HaTzadik, Yosef ben Yaakov, we could see this with Egypt. Yosef was very enamored with Egypt. He dreamt of Egypt. He thought the Hebrew mission could be achieved through the empire of Egypt. Ultimately, he realizes this is wrong. At the end of our parsha, he realizes this was a mistake, and he tells his brothers, "You're going to go home, and you're going to bring me with you, please." Because he and that tshuva, the realization that his plan didn't work, this idea of influencing the Egyptian kingdom didn't really work. And it seemed to work for a point. It looked like it was working at a certain point. But when we get to this parsha, we see not only was Yosef in last week's parsha unable to influence the priesthood of Egypt, which is like the ideological core of Egypt, we see that 17 years later in this parsha, Yosef has lost his proximity to power. When he wants to contact Paro, he doesn't contact Paro directly. He goes through other members of the court. So Yosef no longer wields the power he once did because Egypt doesn't need him to the extent that it used to. Right? So Yosef is very much focused on what we share in common with other nations, very interested in Israel's place amongst the nations. And I think also believes, this is not disconnected from the fact that Israel's economic and security well-being is connected to our connection to other nations. I think Yosef very much sees that. Then you have Yehuda, which is like the opposite tribe, not as good as Yosef as building states, economies, armies, but much more deeply rooted in our identity, our history, our values, our temple. It's a different story. Yehuda focuses more on what is unique about us, not what we share in common with others. And we see very clearly when you look at these two kingdoms in the Sefer Melachim, right, in the time of our kingdoms, after the death of Shlomo, the kingdom splits between Yehuda and Yisrael. Yehuda is the tribe of Yehuda, the tribe of Shimon, the tribe of Levi, and the tribe of Binyamin. And the rest of the tribes, for the most part, in the kingdom of Israel are led by Yosef, specifically Ephraim most of the time. The kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of Yosef, is the more powerful kingdom. It's the kingdom that's stronger economically, stronger diplomatically, stronger militarily, more connected to the rest of the world, more plugged into the international community. The trade routes run through its territory. It has the shores, right? Meaning it has shipping. Whereas Yehuda is very much a landlocked desert kingdom. Now, we think of Yehuda as the more powerful kingdom because many of us today descend from them, right? Most of the Jews in the world today are descendants of Yehuda, Shimon, Levi, or Binyamin, right? That's why we're called Jews, because we come from that kingdom of Yehuda, the kingdom of Judah. But like I'm a Kohen, I'm not a Jew. I'm not from the tribe of Yehuda, I'm from the tribe of Levi, but I'm called a Jew because we were part of the kingdom of Yehuda, the kingdom of Judea. So, and you see that for the first time, by the way, in Megillat Esther, where Mordechai, who's very clearly an Ishimini, a man from the tribe of Binyamin, being called a Yehudi. Right? On the one hand, he's called a Yehudi, a Jew. On the other hand, it's made clear from the tribe of Binyamin, because the tribe of Binyamin was part of the kingdom of Yehuda, and that's how we became Jews from then on. Okay. Now, it's also important to note that when Yehuda engages with outside nations, it's usually having an influencing role, whereas when Yosef engages with outside nations, it's being influenced for the most part. We see this clearly in Parshat Vayeshev, where Yosef resists the advances of Potiphar's wife, and we learn that it would have been destruction for Yosef had Yosef given in to temptation and slept with her. Whereas in the same parsha, Yehuda has relations with what he thinks is a sex worker, but turns out to be his daughter-in-law Tamar. It's not good. It's not a good thing that Yehuda did, but it's part of his tshuva process. It's part of his story. It's an important part of his coming home, coming back to who he really is, coming back to the family. So it's not destructive to him in the way that would have been destructive for Yosef. And we see that expressed later with the kingdoms, whereas Shlomo, the king of Yehuda, has a relationship with Hiram, the king of the Phoenicians, which leads to the benefit of Israel. It leads to the king of the Phoenicians contributing wood for the construction of the Beit HaMikdash in Jerusalem. King Achav of the tribe of Ephraim, Yosef, kingdom of Israel, he takes the princess from Phoenicia, marries her, Izebel, and she destroys his kingdom. So ends up hunting down the prophets of Hashem.
So the same act by different individuals, completely different results.
Right. The different tribal forces, some are better, some are worse at interacting with the outside world. Now, the irony here is Yosef wants the relationship with the outside world, but maybe shouldn't have it. Yehuda doesn't necessarily want it, doesn't see the value in it, but is more equipped to having that relationship with the outside world. So in a way, maybe we could say Yehuda needs to learn to understand the value of a relationship with the other nations, whereas Yosef is right to see a value, but should understand he's not the right one.
Susceptible to.
Yeah. So it's interesting that when you look at any, now if you come to Israeli society today, almost any or every social or political issue in Israeli society today is really an expression of this tension between Yehuda and Yosef, right? Because some people look at a social or political issue and they think to themselves, well, what does the Torah say? What's the halakha? What have our ancestors done in this situation? Meaning, how would we understand this within the history of our people, the historiography of our people? If something like this has happened before, whether in the time of Tanakh, whether in the time of the Maccabees, whether in the time of Rabbi Akiva and the sages, if this were to have happened before in history, how would we have thought of this? What would be the right thing? What would have been the wrong thing? What would be considered moral here? What would be considered immoral, right? How do we see this issue? They would contextualize the issue that way, within the context of Jewish history, Jewish values, Jewish teaching, stretching back thousands of years. Yosef might look at the same social or political issue and say, well, what's considered moral according to the dominant civilization today? He might not even go through that process of asking the question in that way, but he'll automatically look at that. He'll automatically look at what's politically correct in the dominant civilization today. That's what we're supposed to think.
How we perceived by.
Yeah. And that's what Yosef does. So Yosef looks at Yehuda in many cases as backwards and as dangerously out of touch with where the world is at today. And Yehuda looks at Yosef as having shallow roots, weak roots, and an inferiority complex when it comes to the values and worldviews of other peoples, right? So this is kind of the tension, and you see it, right, in Israeli society very clearly. Now, so these two leadership tribes each have radical expressions, what we'll call extreme expressions, okay? So for Yosef, the extreme expression of Yosef is Dan. Dan are the Jews who cannot really deal with national consciousness. They're very anarchistic in nature. They have trouble understanding the value of Am Yisrael, right? The value of the nation of Israel. They're often the Jews involved in BDS movements against Israel. Like if you see like these are Jews who actually take anti-Israel positions in Israeli society. These are Israelis who vote for Palestinian parties on election day. This is the tribe of Dan. But the tribe of Dan is very important because even though the prophet Ovadiah teaches us that it's ultimately Yosef that would destroy Esav, right? Esav actually being Western civilization in this case. It's ironic because Yosef has the ability to be like Esav. Yosef wants to be like Esav, but Yosef is also the part of Israel that can destroy Esav. The prophet Ovadia says that Yosef is the flame, right? Yaakov is the fire, Esav is the straw, Yosef is the flame. But the Midrash teaches us that it's actually Hushim ben Dan who kills Esav in Hebron. When Esav, in this week's Parsha, when Esav tries to block Yaakov from being buried in the final burial plot in Mar Machpelah, because remember, Esav believes in something important to understand about Esav and Western civilization and Amalek. Esav also, by the way, has an extreme expression, that's Amalek, which I would categorize as white nationalism, right? They believe they're the real Israel, not the Jews. What Israel is in the world, Esav believes he is. And Esav is happy with Yaakov being his little brother, who he protects, he sticks up for, he defends. But Yaakov can't be Israel. Esav has to be Israel. Right? Remember, Israel was split into two in Rivka's womb, Esav and Yaakov. The idea that Yitzchak understood was they're going to work together, as you're going to work as a team to be Yisrael. Rivka saw that Esav can't be part of it because they represent two different civilizations constantly in conflict throughout history. When one is up, the other's down. When the other's up, the other's down. Right? But Esav, therefore he can't be part of it. But Yaakov has the ability within him to be like Esav, and that's Yosef. And when Yaakov learns to be like Esav, it becomes Yisrael. Yisrael is the result of Yaakov learning to be like Esav. But Esav wants to be Yisrael. And he doesn't want Yaakov buried in the plot, so he tries to stop it. And he's killed by Hushim ben Dan. And if you think about it today, if you look at the Jewish world today, say, what tribe of Israel today is most consciously fighting against Esav? Most consciously fighting against, Western civilization, the capitalist system, liberal ideology, imperialism. It's Dan. Dan are the Jews involved in radical left-wing politics. And it makes sense that somebody from the tribe of Dan ultimately brings down Esav. So that's the extreme expression of Yosef. And it's important to note also that the Mishkan will later be built by a combination of two people. Bezalel ben Uri, right, from the tribe of Yehuda, which represents Malchut and the leadership of Israel, like Yehuda is the correct leader of Israel. And Aholiav ben Achisamach from the tribe of Dan. Like these two forces need to come together. The stability of the leadership, the correct leadership of the kingdom of Israel, and the all the way opposite force within Israel, that's constantly agitating against the structure, that's trying to push beyond the framework, that's uncomfortable with Jewish particularism, that is fighting for, revolution and making the world better. These two forces have to work together, ultimately. And so you see, Yehuda is the correct leadership tribe, but his two extreme expressions are Shimon and Levi. Two different types of extreme expressions, meaning they're sharing the ideology, the basic ideology of Yehuda, right? Shimon is like the Jewish extremist we're familiar with most of the time, the one who is maybe attacking Palestinians on the roads, Kahanistim, Hilltop Youth, La Familia, like Beitar Yerushalayim fans, like those who just hate who they perceive to be the enemy population and want to hurt them. It's very simplistic. It's very, us, them, right? And Shimon, by the way, their role within Israel, they're meant to be early childhood education. That's their tafkid, early childhood education, because small children need very clear values, very clear education. Who are we? Who are them? Touch my sister, I slaughter your village, right? Now it says in the Midrash that in reward for when he was 14 years old, destroying Shechem to rescue Dinah, Shimon was given control over early childhood education. Now, Levi is a different type of Jewish extremist. That's more like Yeshivat Haramor, right? That's like the like ideological extremism, like more high-level intellectual extremism, but understanding Israel's true identity, true mission, and having what appeared to be very harsh and extreme ideas in regards to, foreign cultural elements in our society and foreign ideas, infiltrating into Israel and really trying to fight for our pure identity and our pure worldview, and Levi and Shimon, it's very important. They both have educational roles in the nation. Yaakov actually, in his bracha to them, says they should be dispersed within Israel. So we should look at them as like salt and pepper, right? The food needs them, the nation needs them, but evenly scattered throughout, right? Well, Levi, Shimon is actually concentrated within Yehuda, so it has a kind of maybe like a grounding role on Yehuda, that it keeps Yehuda somewhat connected to the more fundamental, base elements of our mission and our identity. Levi is scattered throughout Israel, and Levi's main role, the main role of the Kohanim and the Leviim, is to inspire the nation to want to really live its story. They're like what we can call kiruv rabbis today. They're the ones who are trying to, keep everyone on mission, keep everyone, on living the story of Israel. That's their function. Now then you have Yisachar, right? Yisachar, we can look at today as the Charedim. Yisachar loves Torah, they want to teach Torah, they want to learn Torah, and they're very good at it. But when we talk about their Torah, it's not like the Torah of Levi and Yehuda, which kind of focuses more on the broader mission of Israel in history. And within that, there's, of course, how you make Tiyan Shabbat, and how a woman properly prepares the mikvah, and how do you kasher a pot. All those things are important. But for Yisachar, that's what the Torah is. For Yehuda and Levi and Shimon, that's a part of the Torah. But the Torah is much bigger than that. There's a mission that the Jewish people have in history, and we need to... And Yisachar, for the most part, doesn't really see that part. So they're really good at developing the halacha. They're really good. Excuse me. Yisachar is really good at the halachic minutia of Torah, but they don't always see the bigger picture, and they don't always necessarily want to get involved in national issues, right? Because when they say the Torah is the most important thing, they agree. Yehuda, Levi, Shimon, Yisachar, they all agree the Torah is the most important thing. But I think they disagree on what the Torah is. And for Yisachar, the Torah is, learning Gemara and learning up the halacha and developing the halacha and applying the halacha. That's great. And that's why most of our justices in the Sanhedrin, most of our great dayanim in the Sanhedrin in ancient times, are from the tribe of Yisachar, because they understood the halacha back and forth, right? But in terms of understanding the mission and purpose of Israel, that's more Yehuda and Levi. Yehuda and Levi essentially share a Torah. Today we can call it the Torah of Rav Kook, as we understand it in Israeli society today. Torah Eretz Yisrael, right? But the difference between them is Levi wants all the other tribes to be like Levi. In the same way that Yisachar thinks all the other tribes should be like Yisachar, and Yosef thinks all the other tribes should be like Yosef. Yehuda recognizes the value in Yosef and Yisachar and Shimon and Levi and Naphtali and Dan and Reuven, all of them, right? And that's why Yehuda is the leader. Because even though he shares the same hashkafa as Levi, he shares the same Torah as Levi, he sees the value in all the different worldviews. They don't all have to think like me. And so therefore Yehuda is the correct leader. Now Zvulun is like Yosef in a way that he's engaged with the outside world. He's very much a businessman. Zvulun is a very successful Jewish businessman who has the worldview of the sons of Leah. Basically, the worldview, he usually leans a little more towards Yisachar's Torah, but can appreciate Levi and Yehuda's Torah as well, or certainly Shimon. Shimon's Torah is like Levi's. Shimon's Torah is like Yisachar's, but with nationalism in many ways. Like Shimon's Torah is much more Haredi than Levi and Yehuda in many ways, but it's with nationalism, and therefore it's kind of a very simplistic, like religious nationalism. Whereas with Yehuda and Levi, it's a little more complicated, right? So Zvulun, for the most part, accepts the Yisachar Shimon approach to Torah, isn't against the Yehuda Levi type, but might not fully understand it because his sole occupation is commerce. He's making money, but he's giving his money to the shul, to the rabbi, to the yeshiva, right? His worldview is not the worldview of Yosef. He'll travel in other civilizations. He'll make money in other civilizations, but he doesn't see them as superior. He doesn't have an inferiority complex when it comes to these other civilizations. Therefore, he can make his money. He'll make lots of money, and he likes making money. But at the end of the day, his worldview is a worldview of Torah. Then we have Naphtali, who is very much a producer of aesthetics, art, literature, music, right? Naphtali are like the Jews in Tzfat, like all the artists there, and also sometimes the ones who don't want to hear politics at the Shabbat table. They just want like a spiritual experience, right? Often many musicians, right? A lot of the kind of like Rav Shlomo Carlebach followers are more in the Naphtali camp, you could say. Then you have Dan, we talked about. Then there's Gad, which is like the warrior tribe. Like they were our fiercest warriors in ancient times. They were known to be able to cut off the head and right arm in one strike. Right? We all used to use sickle swords back then. So they would, with the sickle sword, actually take off the head and right arm of an opponent. That's what they were known for. That's how you can see the victims of the tribe of Gad. They're great military commanders, but they don't necessarily have the bigger picture. So like if they think it's strategically advantageous to retreat from battle in a specific situation, that might be true according to those military conditions. But you sometimes also have to factor in the morale, the deeper message of that retreat, how the nation will experience it, understand it. God is just like military, right? So we have generals like that in our army who are very much, they can answer a question about the military pros and cons, right? The strategic pros and cons, right? Of this strike, of this deal, of this, can we do a deal? Can we not do a deal? But they're not thinking of the larger impact on the national psyche or necessarily the ramifications 2 years from now if the same thing happens again, but they're very focused on just the very dry military. Yes. Dry military considerations, mission driven, very good. Then we have Asher, which is also very wealthy and provides, for the nation. And then there's of course Binyamin, who's the youngest of the tribes and represents the future. Binyamin represents the future trajectory of the nation. But Binyamin himself is likened to a wolf that tears its prey to shreds, right? Binyamin also has this maybe experience of not wanting to be controlled by other brothers, and ends up getting into a civil war with the other tribes over the issue of state right, like tribal rights versus national rights, really. Who's responsible to judge these criminals from the tribe of Binyamin? Is it the tribe's responsibility? Is it the national responsibility? And that leads to civil war, because you could see that Binyamin is trying to push back against the authority of his brothers over him. But on the other hand, Binyamin is really the future, the next generation, And the fight between Yehuda and Yosef over Binyamin is really the fight over whether Yosef or Yehuda are the true, which one of them is the true path of the patriarchs, right? And ultimately, Binyamin goes with Yehuda, right? That's very important, that Binyamin goes with Yehuda, even though Binyamin had every reason to go with Yosef, right? But he goes with Yehuda, and Jewish history continues with Yehuda because Binyamin went with Yehuda. So that's the next generation. And it's important with each of these tribes to really, elaborate, and there's so much to see, and you can see it, the more. So when we look at Israeli society today, if we limit ourselves to the Western labels, like who is a leftist, who's a rightist, who's a liberal, who's a conservative, who's a secular, who's religious, we're not getting the full story of what's going on, because you have many Jews in all these tribes, where you can say, you could say that the tribe of Yosef, for example, has expressions that are Torah-ni expressions and are expressions that are not Torah-ni expressions, right? Disconnected from Torah. Now, if you're only looking at the political forces in Israeli society that are, or the political parties that we'll call Zionist parties, I'd say all of the Zionist parties are really Yosef, right? Yosef is Zionism. Mashiach ben Yosef is the Zionist movement. Now, what is represented by Yehuda, Shimon, and Levi might be what comes after Zionism. Right? It's very important to understand that we have to know that even though, for example, the party of Bezalel Smotrich is called the religious Zionist party, right? The religious Zionist party is not actually a Zionist party. What was called religious Zionism 100 years ago,
It
was a chelek of Zionism. Like Zionism Begedola, Zionism more broadly achieved its goal. Zionism was a movement of Mashiach ben Yosef. Yosef, before Zionism, was pushing a very assimilationist agenda in Europe, right, with the Haskalah. And in Europe, all we really had was Yosef and Yisachar. Those are the major tribes in Europe. But the Haskalah, in a way, gave birth to Zionism, even though Zionism is also a rejection of the Haskalah, at least a rejection of the Haskalah's rebranding of Jewish identity. Because in the Haskalah, they basically said, we're not actually part of a Jewish nation. We are Germans with a Jewish religion, or Frenchmen with a Jewish religion. So Zionism was a correction of that, and Zionism really returned to all of us. This is the real contribution of Yosef. Zionism returned to all of us the idea that we're part of one nation, right? Yosef gave that back to us. Even Yisachar forgot that. Even in the Haredi world, the yeshiva world, they forgot we're one nation, right? That's why it looks like, from the perspective of Israel's critics, it looks as if Zionism hijacked a religion called Judaism and gave it a national component and created like an artificial nationalism out of it. The reason it looks that way is because for a period before Zionism, a lot of the Jewish world forgot that, but that was always core to our identity until the Haskalah. So between the Haskalah and Zionism, we had a moment of forgetting that. So it looks like Zionism took a non-national religious identity and turned it into a national identity.
But instead it resurfaced what was there.
Right. It is really bringing back to the fore what was already there and reminding us. And that's a great contribution of Zionism. We can't forget that. It's not just that they built the material for us, the material cup, the material vessel for us to fill with content, but Zionism also really restored this concept of us being responsible for each other, of us being one with each other, the oneness of Israel, the nation of Israel, that we're one national identity. Really, the national component of our identity, they restored. Because the Haredim, the Torah world, was very zealous in fighting for the ritual and legal and maybe spiritual components of our identity. But the territorial and national components of our identity, they dropped the ball on. And I think Zionism definitely picked that up. So that's good, Baruch Hashem. And then by doing that, by coming back to the land and being successful, Zionism in a way, finished its revolutionary role, which means that once the state is established, once the vessel's here but still empty, Zionism, or Yosef, backslides towards its assimilationist tendencies of wanting this new state of Israel to be a nation like all other nations, to be a normal nation, to be a sane nation, to be a Western nation. So in terms of they want to fill the cup, they want to fill the vessel up with the content of Western liberalism. Right, and which they think is good and moral and correct, and that's what a state should be, and that's what a well-functioning state and a moral state is that. But then Yehuda, Shimon, Levi, they all came back to life as a result of Yosef's success. And so, and in a time of Zionism, Rav Kook, he was not a Zionist. He said Zionism is too shallow an ideology to sustain a living nation, let alone revive a dead one. But he says we should support what the Zionists are doing because of what Hashem is doing and what the goal of Jewish history is. But he was already trying to plant the seeds for the new thing, Degel Yerushalayim. Right? Rav Kook had this a desire to create a movement, Degel Yerushalayim, which would be like the more Torah-based understanding of what Israel coming back to life is all about, and to kind of be there, I guess, to start filling the void left by Zionism when it would kind of run out of steam. As Zionism would run out of steam, Degel Yerushalayim should maybe take the wheel. And that would be like kind of Yehuda taking over, right? But in Rav Kook's time, he had only a few students. There wasn't like this big Yehuda force in Israeli society. Today, there's a Yehuda force, a strong Yehuda force in Israeli society. And what's difficult is that because we're using the wrong words, we can use the words religious Zionism to describe people who are Yehuda, and we can use it also to describe people who are Levi, and we can use it also to describe some people who are Shimon, and we can use it also to describe people who are Yosef, like Yeshivat Har Etzion, like Gush. They're Talmidei Chachamim, they love Torah, in a way, they kind of have a Haredi Torah too. Their Torah is very similar to the Haredi Torah because it seems to be devoid of like mission and historic purpose, etc. It's more about the law and the sugya and like, engaging with the Gemara and the Halacha, etc. That's their understanding of Torah. But they're able to engage with that Torah fully while still psychologically living in Western civilization. So what they've done, a lot of the Yosef, what we'll call the Torah-ni Yosef people, is they've created what we call modern Orthodox, right? Because that's all about being able to live in the broader civilization, right? The civilization not being ours, the civilization being somebody else's, right? And maybe Esav, right? Let's say. But to be fully halachically observant and even fully engaged with the Torah, daily within that civilization. But the values, the ethics, the morals, the prioritization of values, that's still of the West, right? That's still Western, that's still liberal. And when I say liberal, I obviously include conservative and liberal within that. So if you look at some of the Rabbanim at Gush or Yeshiva University, there are what we can call right-wing Rabbanim and left-wing Rabbanim, conservative Rabbanim and liberal Rabbanim, but they're all functioning within the ideological context of Western civilization. They're all functioning within a liberal ideological paradigm, as opposed to, let's say, but when someone's functioning in that paradigm, and this is why, by the way, a lot of the other Yosef people, the people without kippot from Yosef, the people who are, running the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange or the high-tech companies or the army or the Shabak or certain government institutions, when they look at the Gush, they say, oh, those are the good ones. Those are the good religious Zionists. Those are the sane religious Zionists because they're functioning in the ideological paradigm of Yosef, as opposed to Yehuda and Shimon and Levi, who are all considered crazy. They're considered to be living on a totally different planet. And we have to remember, Yosef is very, very weary of Shimon. Yosef, even the Torah of Yosef, the Torah world of Yosef, is very anti-extremism. One of the things that really, I think, characterizes like Gush and that approach to Torah and that application. First of all, their position is, interestingly, the Torah does not have a political position most of the time, and they're against those who claim it does, right? They're against when Rabbanim claim the Torah does have a political position on modern issues. But they're also very against Jewish extremism. For them, a Jewish extremist is that's like the biggest chilul Hashem. So Yosef, even the Torah leaders of Yosef, are very against Shimon and often against Levi. I think there's certain voices in the Yehuda camp who can speak to them, right? And that's the goal, but it takes effort, it takes work. So it should be understood that this isn't about who's right wing, who's left wing. And in theory, like you could be a Yehuda person or a Levi person who's a leftist, right? Like me. I'm very critical. I believe that Marx, Engels, Lenin, I think they're correct about capitalism. I think they're correct about imperialism. I think they're correct about understanding the material world and how these, forces of production interact and what they produce and the inequality of society and that ultimately we're meant to bring humanity to something better than capitalism. But I believe that it has to come to the kingdom of Israel, right? So I'm a Yehuda person or maybe a Levi person. It depends on the day, I guess, right? But I might be a leftist by all accounts, right? So I think it's very important to understand our differences less according to the surface level Western labels that we're used to, and more a level deeper to know the tribe. Like, what tribe is that person's soul coming from? And then they could say, that's okay. So this person is going to be uncomfortable with too much, Jewish fundamentalism. They're not going to. I've seen it by the way before. Like even in Machon Meir, I've seen guys come to learn here who are really Yosef people, and they're not happy here. They feel everybody's an extremist. Why is everybody talking like this? Why is everybody saying these crazy things? Like this is not responsible, and Rabbanim shouldn't talk like this to Balei Tshuva because it's dangerous. Like it's very crazy to them. So they go to Gush and they're happy, or somewhere like that and they're happy, right? And there are other people who are at Issachar yeshivot, but they're like, wow, but I feel like something is happening in history and I want to be part of it. And why are we just all dressed like we're in Poland, learning all day, when at least we should be studying the Torah that's relevant to the fact that something is happening in history, that we've liberated Jerusalem after 2,000 years. This is important. How can this not be part of our Torah, right? So that guy will have to find his way to Machon Meir, right? Like Machon Meir is definitely an institution bordering Yehuda and Levi, right? And so so it's very important, I think, not that everybody come to Machon Meir and learn here, but that those whose nishamot are really belong here should be here, and those nishamot that belong at Gosh should go to Gosh, and those nishamot that belong in Mayanot should go to Mayanot, and those nishamot that belong to like Eish or Semeach or Machon Yaakov or whatever, they should go there. Like they should find, everyone should be able to find where their nishama grows and evolves in Torah the strongest.